Hello everyone and welcome to our Paladin review for the Boomsday Project. Pandemonium and I are going to be rating all these cards on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 are your trash unplayable cards like Duskfall and Aviana, 2 your fringe playable or niche tech cards like Dire Frenzy, Mossy Horror, 3 are your cards that are playable in some decks like Life Drinker, 4 kind of your staple in multiple deck cards. So like Houndmaster Shore is for Hunter, where you see it in a lot of Hunter decks. And 5 are your meta-defining cards. So these are cards that either appear a lot in a lot of different decks across classes, or they define a very specific archetype for a class that is actually relevant in the meta. So Shadowhawk is a great example of the latter. And let's get started with these Paladin cards, starting of course with the legendaries. And first up is Kangor's Endless Army. Kangor's Endless Army is a 7-mana legendary spell. Resurrect 3 friendly mechs. They keep any magnetic upgrades. So I'm pretty excited about this card, but let's hear what you have to say first, Pandemonia.
So this is the kind of card which, once again, screams sort of a combo-y based deck. Where you want to play a bunch of mechs, make them all big and Voltron-y, then they die, and you bring them back. I'm a bit torn as because I think this is one of those cards which I think is quite difficult to accurately say how good or bad it is, because it's one of those cards where it either literally makes an entire deck and defines a meta, or it's absolutely trash and doesn't see play. Right? I don't think there's a place where it's okay. I think it's either one or the two extremes.
Sure. I think that this is not really. I mean, you talked about it being a combo-y card. I don't really think it's like that. I think it's just a single card board fill for like a mid-range deck, right? It's a way to refill your board in a single card. And for these kind of proactive decks, that's always been a really powerful effect. I mean, if we look at like, I think a lot of the times you're going to get better off this than you would have gotten off, what's that old Hunter spell, the one that got nerfed? Call of the Wild. Like, this is going to be better than Call of the Wild most of the time. It's going to be, and you have more control over it to a certain extent. I mean, Call of the Wild was always just animal companions, whereas Kangor's Endless Army, you can kind of manipulate it and play it when you know that your pool is as stacked as you want it to be. I think the biggest downfall of this card is that the mechs in general kind of suck, and that Kangor's Endless Army is going to be the reason to play that deck largely. I think this is one of the most powerful of the legendary spells, and I really am a pretty big fan of this spell, and we'll actually see a deck that I made with a mech paladin deck a little bit later, but for now I'm gonna give this Kangor's Endless Army a 4.
I'm gonna give this a 2, because I think because the 3 mechs are random, like it's gonna make, like, even though you want to play mid range, I think the fact that you're gonna have to play your mechs earlier, it's going to then make it a bit awkward in terms of which ones do you buff, because you're not sure which ones are going to come back.
We'll get to that. I'll explain that, my thinking about that a little bit later when we get to the deck and some of the other.
So I'm going to give it 2.
Cards. Okay.
So the next legendary though is Kangor himself, Crystal Smith Kangor. 2 mana, 1/2 legendary minion with Divine Shield and Lifesteal. At effect of your healing is doubled. So the first card when I saw this, my mind kind of went to was Wicker Flame Burn Bristle. Obviously with 1 less attack, cost 1 less, and no taunt, which I think is quite a big thing.
Yeah.
So the thing is, for a legendary minion, I don't think he's like that. I think the card itself is a solid card, but like it's a bit, I think, underwhelming for a legendary minion, right? Like,
sure.
I think a legendary minion, you kind of hoping for something a little bit more flashy, if you will, or something a bit more like special,
a bit more game.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he's serviceable. I personally think he's pretty solid. So like, I think Crystal Smith Kangor is a 3. Like, I don't think he's exceptionally great. And UDIP?
I think it's a 2. I think he's not even something you always want to play in your slower paladin decks. At the moment, it's pretty difficult to actually make any use of his healing effect, and I think if you're not making use of his healing effect, he's pretty weak. I mean, I think even though that healing effect was saying there's, that's kind of meh, I think if you scrap that text off, it would be a 1 for me. So like I think to say it's a 2 is relying on at least making some use of that healing effect, and I think it's going to be pretty difficult to do that. So I think at most I can give it a 2.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I give it a 2 is actually just because it does have some synergy with some other Paladin cards like Christology that we'll see a bit later. It's one of the reasons I actually think it might be a little bit playable.
Okay.
Next
up, the next card, I don't think we will disagree at all.
Yeah, we've had disagreement so far, but none on this. Glowstone Technician, 6 mana, 3/4. That's enough to already put me off it. And if it couldn't get any worse, it is Battle Cry. Give all minions in your hand +2/+2. Yay, a hand buff card. But this time we're paying 6 mana for a 3/4. Previously, we've paid 2 mana for a 1/1/1 that gave +1/+1 to all your cards in your hand. That's better than this. That was trash. This is trash. This is one of the worst cards in the set. It's a 1.
Yeah, a solid 1.
Solid 1.
Okay. The next card is a little more interesting though. Like, this was spoiled on the Streamer Showdown when they were doing the questions and things. It's a 4 mana epic spell called Prismatic Lens, and it reads: draw a minion and a spell from your deck, swap their costs. So this is a very interesting card in that it requires a very unique approach to deck building.
Yeah.
I think as we mentioned in the other video, you kind of have to decide: do you want to go for the angle of filling your deck with cheap minions and then expensive spells, or cheap spells and a couple expensive minions? I think obviously those are like the two approaches. I think.
Yeah, and I think because this is Paladin, it's not like they have very many good spells at like contesting the board or keeping yourself alive in the early game. So I think you're pretty much always going to be forced to go down the expensive spells and cheaper minions route. The other important thing to note about Prismatic Lens is that it's a way to tutor for spells. So if you actually don't have many spells in your deck, like for instance, if you're just running Kangor's Endless Army and a lot of mechs, particularly if they're mechs that are just cheaper than Kangor's Endless Army, you can use Prismatic Lens to fetch your Kangor's Endless Army to create your board refill. So I think that is probably the most powerful use of Prismatic Lens that I can see right now. One of the other good spells to swap it with is Dino Size. Or if you want to go in a slower, more defensive route, then something like Lay on Hands, which is another way to refill your hand. I mean, if you swap that with like a 1-drop, you play 1 mana Lay on Hands, drawing 3 cards. The healing is probably not that effective if you're playing a deck full of 1-drops. You've probably been at a relatively high life total because you've been pressuring them rather than the other way around. But yeah, I mean, Prismatic Lens, I think it has some decent applications. I think the one thing that's interesting is you're very often not going to ever want to play 2 in a deck because often you'll just get the other Prismatic Lens from your Prismatic Lens. So, if you have 2 Prismatic Lenses and 1 Kangor's Endless Army, your first Prismatic Lens is a 50-50 to draw Kangor's or Prismatic Lens. And when you draw Prismatic Lens, that's pretty bad.
Well, you could get a 1-minute Prismatic Lens there, right?
Sure. And like most of the time, I think in that deck with Kangor's Endless Army, you're never going to have... most of your minions are not going to be that much cheaper than Prismatic Lens, and then your second Prismatic Lens is more expensive, and I think it's a one-of most of the time.
But do you build your deck around it though? If it's a one-of though, that's kind of the debate then, right?
No, I don't. But I don't think you do. I don't think you do have to build your deck around it.
So you just build a normal deck and then throw in Prismatic Lens.
Yeah, and I mean we'll see with the mech deck that I've built. I've managed to squeeze in 1 Prismatic Lens there now. We can talk about that and the benefits it has there. But overall, I mean, I don't think you have to go to the extremes of like Secret plus Lich King or Dino Size plus 1-drop. I don't think it has to be those extremes all the time. I think Prismatic Lens is a pretty interesting card though. Most of the time though, I think it's going to see fringe play at most, so I'm going to give it a 2.
Yeah, it's 2 for me as well. It's a difficult card to assess.
And then we have Shrink Ray. Shrink Ray is a card that has a familiar effect to us. Shrink Ray, a 5 mana spell, set the attack and health of all minions to 1. So we've seen a lot of Paladin cards traditionally that have set attacks to 1. We've got Equality that sets health to 1, and now Shrink Ray is going to do both in one go. Effectively like polymorphing all the minions, except without the transform side of things.
Yeah, I think this is a very powerful card. Like, I think this is quite a strong card. It's a card not every Paladin deck wants. Your aggressive decks probably don't want this, I don't think. I mean, decks like Odd Paladin probably don't want this, although it might be a source of removal
Yeah,
for them
it's a
to
way
get
of
through.
coming back on the board late with Odd Paladin because you have lots of 1/1s already. There's an
But yeah,
argument to make for it there, but I agree that's probably not the best application of it.
so this is what's it? It's Edric's effect combined with Equality. Because Edric the Pure, I think, set every all attack to one.
Attack to one, yeah.
So I think this is quite a powerful card. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 3. I think it's a solid card. Not every deck is gonna see it, wants it, but I think it is gonna be quite powerful.
I think the biggest thing for me is looking at the immediate meta. I don't really see Control Paladin being all that great, and that's the main deck I think you want to play Shrink Ray in. And the other big things are that at the moment when people go wide with the board, it's boards with like cubes and stuff like that, and then making them 1/1s isn't always that beneficial to you. I mean, the one deck, or they're like token decks where they can make advantageous use of the 1/1 effect anyway. You know, like token druid is not going to care too much if you turn all their minions into 1/1s. The only deck maybe where you have a decent effect is like Zoo. So I think that's the big problem I have with Shrink right now. I think this effect is a little bit less powerful than it seems, and so I'm going to give Shrink Ray a 2.
Okay, sure. The next card we talk about, this is quite a meme card, but I actually like it, is Annoyer Module. So it's basically 2 Annoyatrons stacked on each other. It's a 4-mana, 2/4 mech with Magnetic, Divine Shield, and Taunt. So do you like this card, Dip?
Yeah, actually, at first I was like, it's pretty underwhelming, but when you look at it and you think about how difficult it is to get through something like a Saronite Chain Gang a lot of the time, Annoyer Module has that same kind of, a similar kind of issue. It takes 2 attacks to get through it as well, like with Saronite Chain Gang. In this case, though, it's 1 body instead of 2, so it's a little bit more susceptible to single target removals. Rather than AoE, because it has the Divine Shield that protects it from the AoE. So I think it's an interesting trade-off compared to something like Saronite Chain Gang, actually. And most importantly, I think the magnetic keyword can be pretty powerful. When you're bringing this back with Kangor's Endless Army, that's not so bad, because you're getting something that's going to affect the board right away, because it has that Taunt and Divine Shield that you mentioned. And I also think that a lot of the time, if you get to stick this to something, it can be quite powerful. I'm just not sure how common that is, because I'm not so sold on the mech curve kind of 1 to 4. I only really like the 4 onwards part, to be quite honest.
Yeah, the only other concern is, much like Saronite Chain Gang, for 4-drop, the 2 attack, I think, might present a bit of a problem, right?
Yeah.
So, like, much like Saronite Chain Gang, I think sometimes has the same issue where, sure, it's not a bad sort of play, but, you know, you're struggling to actually effectively contest the board.
Yeah.
So I still like it. So, like, for me, it's a 3.
Yeah. And unlike Saronite, this also can't attack twice. Like Saronite, you can attack twice because you have 2 bodies. Whereas Annoyer Module, it only has that 1 attack in it, which is also an important thing to mention.
Unless you give it Wind Fury.
Yes, unless you give it Wind Fury.
I don't know how, but pretty you can't adapt mechs, right? I mean, I suppose it would be a bit anti-synergistic.
You can give it Wind Fury with adaptation, the 1 Paladin spell, but
yeah, sure. Oh, sure, okay.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I don't think that's particularly likely. I'm gonna go with a 3 as well, purely just for the Kangor's Endless Army mech deck. I think outside of that, it's pretty bad.
And then the next card?
The next card we have is Christology. Christology is a 2-mana spell. It's a rare, draw 2 1-attack minions from your deck. So I mean, the immediate synergy that pops out is Crystal Smith Kangor. I've already just seen that, but there's quite a few other decent 1-attack cards for Paladin.
Yeah, I mean, you've got sort of Bolvar, Lanessa, some of the legendaries. Then you've obviously got things like Acolyte of Pain. I mean, if you want to play cards like Meatwagon. So, like, I like the fact that Blizzard have started to print more cards. Like, are becoming, let's say, should we say, a little bit braver in terms of printing specific draw cards.
Yeah.
So I mean, now we see Christology. I mean, we've seen from Druid, we saw the Juicy Psych Melon.
Yeah.
You know, we saw what's a Prismatic Lens. We started to see them experiment a little bit more with giving people targeted draw. which is, I think, something we haven't really seen before.
Yeah.
And
I think that the thing with Christology is to get the best out of it, 2 mana to draw 2 cards seems pretty good. But these are 2/1 attack minions, so you have to build your deck in a way that you can make best use of that by using, the synergies with a bunch of the minions you mentioned. Another one that sticks out, Stonehill Defender.
Sure.
If you mentioned that one, because Stonehill Defender is so powerful in Paladin, it can get you your Tyrians and your Sunkeeper Tariums, and now it can get you your Annoyer modules too.
Yeah, boys.
At a fairly high rate. So, I think Christology is pretty interesting card. I struggled to find a good deck to put it in. We'll see. I did manage to kind of build one deck roughly around it a little bit later. But overall, I think I'm going to give Christology a 2. I think it's kind of a fringe playable at best at the moment. But I think it definitely could be a lot better in the future.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3 because I think it is pretty good. It's 2 mana, draw 2 cards potentially, so I think, not to mention filtering your draws. So
yeah,
for me it's a 3. And then the next card that you've been trying to make work is Mechano Egg, a 5 mana 0/5 mech, which reads Death Rattle, summon an 8/8 Robosaur, which I presume is the mech. I think.
Yes, it is.
So, Deb, tell me about how you've been trying to make this bad boy work.
So my first instinct was comparing this to Devilsaur Egg, and I was like, yeah, but I don't have Play Dead, I don't have Terrascale Stalker, I have to pay 5 mana for the crappy egg first part of the body that I don't want to do, and I was very unconvinced. I thought this card was pretty bad at first impression, but after looking around at a bunch of the decks and actually trying to build even the Kangor's Endless Army decks, I was getting a little bit more convinced that this is a playable mech compared to some of the others, which, says a little bit about some of the other mechs. But also, the way it curves in Paladin, it makes sense. You can curve Mechano Egg into Stonehill, Spikeridge Steed, which helps a bit. There's quite a few buffs in the Paladin deck, and if you're playing a mech Paladin with magnetic minions, you've got even more buffs. So this is kind of just a body on the board to buff rather than crazy Death Rattle Egg synergies like we see with Hunter, where you're using cube and stuff like that. So I think it's quite different, even possibly kind of synergizing with cards like Equality, but I struggle to really make that kind of thing work, with the Equality Pyromancer stuff. But we'll see a little bit. I've actually got 2 different decks with Mechano Eggs in that we'll see a little bit later.
Yeah, but obviously, with all these eggs and with all these potential buffs and things, these kind of strategies are obviously quite weak to silence. Yeah. So if magnetic and the mechs become popular, expect to see lots of spell breakers, I think.
I honestly think as the mech Paladin deck, with the buffs you have and the magnetic stuff you have, your opponent is not going to have enough silences for you. They're going to have to run 3-4 silences to actually be able to deal with a lot of your stuff. Cause
double Iron Beak out, double Spellbreaker incoming.
Yeah, when things are big enough, you just don't have to you don't have to keep magneticking them, right? You're not going to... Yeah, you're not going to play your magnetic minions or your magnetic cards on the 8/8 Robosaur all that often if you think your opponent could still be holding a polymorph.
Yeah, sure.
You might want to split out the threats.
You're not going to put all your eggs in one basket.
Yes. Or all your eggs in one Robosaur. And that's the versatility that magnetic gives, and probably the biggest benefit. So I think this is the one magnetic deck that kind of convinces me that it could be playable, and I think that's still largely on the end of Kangor's Endless Army. But enough about the deck. We'll see a little bit more about it later. We have 2 other Paladin cards to discuss. First off is a Paladin Secret. Auto Defense Matrix. It's a 1 mana secret, like all of them. Common. When one of your minions is attacked, give it Divine Shield.
So, I think we spoke about it. You activate it very similar way to you would Redemption. You would attack your opponent's weakest minion. But giving it Divine Shield, it does mean it essentially absorbs a hit for free.
Yeah.
How good is that though?
I mean, it's a little bit better than Redemption in that case. Like, it's better than Redemption when you're playing it with big minions, right?
So it's more like what's it?
Noble
Defender, Noble Sacrifice. Yeah,
Yeah.
in that regard.
I mean, I think it is. It's somewhere in between those two secrets in its application. The interesting thing is how it synergizes specifically with Noble Sacrifice in terms of which one happens first. So you kind of want your auto defense matrix to go off first when your opponent attacks your minion, so that your hopefully decent minion on the board gets the divine shield, and then your Noble Sac comes up, protects the minion, and you left with your minion having divine shield, and then you maybe get to trade it where you want. That's kind of the best kind of scenarios for auto defense matrix. But at the moment, the Paladin secret synergy is a bit iffy. I mean, Bellringer Sentry from Witchwood is kind of the one card that might want to push you into a secret deck. And even in that case, I'm a little bit iffy on the secret stuff. So I think at best I can give auto defense matrix a 2. Honestly, it's probably closer to a 1, but I think with the possibility of secret decks being a thing, I don't know. I hate saying like any card with the possibility of this specific card's archetype deck being good. Like, that's the most cop-out answer ever. But yeah,
I'm just gonna give it a straight up 1. I think it's a 1. Like, I'm not even gonna.
I think it's better than a lot of the other Paladin secrets.
Sure, but like I still don't.
Yeah,
think
okay.
that
Paladin secrets are bad. Fine. It's a 1.
I don't like. Yeah, just because it's better.
This card is a 1, right? But it could still see play, but it's still a 1. Like, I mean, that's kind of the thing with most of the Paladin secrets. They're all pretty bad, but if you find if you have powerful enough cards that use them, then they can still be better, even though this is a 1, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? This could be the sleeper, but I'm not convinced.
No, it's definitely not the sleeper. That's very strong.
And then final Paladin card. This one, I think, nobody's sleeping about this one. This has got a lot of people quite excited. And quite funny enough, a 1-mana 1/3 common mech Glowtron, and it has magnetic. And this is basically, I think, this is kind of the one drop, the Paladin 1-drop lots of people have been waiting for. And I think it's quite a powerful 1-drop. Mainly because, like, it's a perfectly good turn 1 play as a 1-mana 1/3. 1/3 mech. That's obviously if you play in mech Paladin, it synergizes all your magnetic stuff. But also, it's usually one of the weaknesses of 1-drops is that they scale very badly into the late game. You don't ever really want to turn 10 draw Voidwalk, or turn 10 draw. Even Mana Worm is bad on turn 10, right?
Yep.
Whereas this, being able to still buff a minion in play, well, +1/+3 is essentially, I think, quite still decent late game.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, it's a 1-mana 1/3 with 2 upsides. One upside is it's a mech, so it's got tribal synergy with what Paladin's trying to do. And the second upside is obviously that it has magnetic as well. So that means it can function, as you say, as a buff. So I think for those reasons, it's pretty good. I actually think it's a card that could be getting cut from mech decks, weirdly enough, even though it's kind of the card I thought we really needed, because I'm just not convinced the curve after it is that good. Like, there's no good 2 magnetic to hit to it. I'd rather have a 2-mana minion that's magnetic to hit to a 1/3 vanilla mech than the other way around, which is currently what we have. We have upgradable Framebot at 2 and Glowtron at 1. If they were swapped around, if Glowtron was neutral and upgradable Framebot was Paladin with magnetic, I would actually think that would be much better for the Paladin deck. That's the one concern I have with Glowtron.
Okay, so you're just worried about the curve. Do you think this? So if they do decide to go with like mechs and Nick set, then it obviously becomes much better, right?
Yeah, I mean, and once again, I think you need that 2-mana magnetic mech. So I think Glowtron is actually a 3. I mean, I was very high on this at first, but when I actually started building these mech decks, that's kind of what convinced me that the card is a little bit deceptive. But ultimately, 1-mana 1/3s, could just see play in like an odd paladin deck that might have 1 or 2 mechs as well. I mean, that's also totally reasonable. So I think it doesn't have to be only dedicated magnetic or mech decks. And obviously, the one concern is if you're not bundling this with other mechs, it makes your Kangor's Endless Army a lot worse as well.
Sure, yeah. So your rating?
3.
I'm going to give us a 4. I think it's a little better than that.
Okay, well, we've talked a lot about the different decks. And first of all, let's have a look at the Control Paladin deck that you've brought us here. We've got a lot of the classic Control Paladin cards, your Wild Pyromancers, Equalities, along that. But tell us more about the new cards and why you think that they could lead Control Paladin back to being a thing.
So, the one thing, as I mentioned earlier, I think Shrink Ray is really powerful. Allows Control Paladin to, just come back in the game and, restabilize the board. But also, I think just like you mentioned, like the fact that the Paladin has the powerful 6 drops in the form of Spikeridge Steed and Sunkeeper Tyrant means I think cards like Giggling Inventor become even better. I like Giggling Inventor to begin with, but now if you have the potential of going Giggling Inventor into Spikeridge Steed, you've got 3 potential targets.
Yep.
Or Giggling Inventor into Sunkeeper Tyrant, where you've got 3/3/3s and 2 of them have Divine Shield potentially, depending on your opponent's board. Yep. So I think that's potentially a very powerful curve.
Yeah.
So I run Crystal Smith Kangor in the deck because I've decided to run Corpse Takers as well. Because Corpse Takers, based on the deck, a high percentage of the time it's going to get both Divine Shield and Taunt, and depending if you've drawn the Kangor or not, it's going to also get Lifesteal, which I think is a really powerful. I mean, a 3/3 Divine Shield Taunt Lifesteal is quite good, I think.
Yeah. I think, other than the possibility that it has Lifesteal, your only other real life gain is what? True Silver Champions actually synergize with Kangor. Honestly, I feel like...
And Uther.
Yeah, but that's not... Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, okay, fine. That can work with Uther because of the weapon. I'm not really sold on the Kangor in the deck, but I think the rest of the shell is not too far away from what Control Paladin could be. I also agree. I really like the Giggling Inventor into, Spikeridge Steed or Sunkeeper Tarim, as we'll see in some of my other decks, or some of the other Paladin decks that are coming up. I'm just not convinced Control Paladin really wins games better than other control decks. And that's the big issue for me with the deck.
Yeah, it's one of those unfortunate cases where the deck might itself actually be not bad, but there might just be better decks to play, right?
Yeah.
It might just be that the overall power level is better, of other decks is better, right?
Yeah, it doesn't beat other control decks in terms of its greed. I mean, you've tried here with Uther, Tyrion, and Lich King, and I also feel like it doesn't really beat aggro decks consistently enough. Because it can be a little bit weak in the early game sometimes. So, that's the big issue I have with Control Paladin right now. It's struggling, but I've always liked Uther the Ebon Blade as a win condition as well. So, maybe, I wouldn't mind seeing Control Paladin be a viable archetype.
Make Control Paladin great again.
And then, speaking of great Paladin decks, we have the first one here. This is the Kangor's Endless Army, or Kangor's Endless Eggs, as I've called it. We have 2 Meccano eggs in the deck, as well as a decent amount of mech synergy. We do have the Glowtron to start off the mech synergy with, because once again, if you draw it in the late game, at least you can tack it onto your other mechs and make them a lot stronger. We've got Nightmare Amalgam, which is a mech as well. This kind of gives us a smoother curve into your Annoyatrons. Annoya modules. And after that, this is kind of where I think the real mech curve is actually going to start in a lot of mech decks from 4 onwards. I think it's totally reasonable to cut the Amalgam and the Glowtron. But I think that the Coppertail Imposter is pretty powerful. It's a 4-mana 4/4 with Battlecry. Give it stealth until next turn. So unfortunately, the stealth doesn't really carry if you resurrect it, because it's a Battlecry, or if you kind of magnetic anything to it and then resurrect it. With the Kangor's Endless Army. But that can also sometimes be a good thing if you just are going to, attach the taunt stuff to it, for instance.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, a Noya module, that's pretty good to hit on Coppertail Imposter. So is, of course, the Ziliax and the War Gear that we curve into, as we kind of saw in the Hunter deck. Pretty much similar there. Coppertail Imposter into War Gear,
face.
Ziliax. Yep.
Just just +5/+5, and let's go face, boys.
Yeah. And obviously with Paladin, we've also got the Sunkeep Batarium, Spike Ridge Steed, synergies with that Giggling Inventor, like you mentioned. I mean, Giggling Inventor also just gets you the 1/2 mechs, which, whilst the Annoyatrons aren't superb cards to resurrect with Kangor's Endless Army, I think they're actually not that bad. It's the same kind of thing with Annoya module. They just provide you with annoying minions for your opponent. And I think with Kangor's Endless Army, if you're resurrecting 1 to 1.5 really good minions, it's okay if you just resurrect one kind of 1/3 or 1/2, or Annoyatron, basically. There are kind of other mechs that I've chosen to keep out of this deck, like the Mecharoo, for instance, the 1 mana 1/1 with Death Rattle, just because that makes the pool so much worse, because it puts kind of 2 bad mechs in the pool a lot of the time. So even the Glowtron kind of was on the edge for me.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Like, I'm a bit skeptical. If you want to play like a mech deck where you want to play on curve, you're going to end up playing, I think, a lot more, let's say, bad mechs to get off Kangor's Endless Army. So that's why. But my personal view is that if you eventually want to get Kangor's Endless Army, you're going to have to play a lot fewer. You're going to have to pick which mechs you actually play a lot more carefully, right?
Yeah, but I think that's fine. I think Kangor's Endless Army, you don't have to play that many mechs to make it reasonable. Like, you can see the majority of my early curve doesn't involve mechs. I mean, the Nightmare Amalgam could honestly be a number of other 3-drops. You could just play like Vicious Fledgling in its place, for instance.
Vicious Fledgling, yeah, boys.
If you don't need the mech. I mean, it might be entirely pointless to have Nightmare Amalgam as a mech here. So I think that it's totally reasonable to actually just curve like relatively normally. I mean, we've got Prince Keleseth as well that has some synergy with the Meccano Egg as well. And then the one other thing to mention, I mean, generally your turn 5 here, you're going to set up well for the Spike Ridge Steed or the Sunkeep Batarium. I mean, those are the kind of threats for if they leave the egg on the board, right? As well as there's a cheeky Dino Size there with a cheeky Prismatic Lens. Prismatic Lens can hit you pretty much just good spells in this deck. It's the Spike Ridge Steeds, Kangor's Endless Army, and Dynasize. Those are the only 4 other spells other than Prismatic Lens. So very often you're going to be swapping a minion for a spell, and the spell is going to be getting cheaper. Sure, the minion gets a bit more expensive, but hopefully you can kind of just have such a powerful play with these powerful spells that it works out.
Yeah, so, I mean, or you get the feels bad where you get like Spike Ridge Steed and Sunkeeper, and you're like, yeah, boys. 4 mana, draw 2 cards.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think this deck also has so many effects that you want to silence that it's just a little bit too much stuff to silence, right? I mean, we've got all the mechanics, all the mech stuff. We got the Meccano Egg. We got the Valenier as well. And then the Dino Size to finish it all off. So I think this deck's pretty interesting. I'm definitely going to look to try and play it if I do open the Ziliax and the Kangor's Endless Army. I don't know if I'll be rushing to craft those, even though I do think Kangor's Endless Army
I see what you did
decent. There. I mean, neither of them have rush, though.
Yeah. Well, Ziliax does.
Oh, Ziliax does, yeah, sure. Okay. And then finally, we have another kind of mech paladin deck, but this one with a little bit of a different flavor. This one is kind of based around the Meat Wagon Meccano Egg synergy. So you're pulling out your Meccano Eggs with your Meat Wagons here. And we've got a lot of other buffs, kind of more general buffs in this deck, and a more kind of general like curve. We've got Linessa Sunsorrow, we've got double Christology in the deck as well. That's obviously to help you get your Meat Wagons, helps you get your Linessa, and it also gets you Stonehill Defenders. Just because, if you have like 2 Christology in a deck, you want to have, I'd say, 3 to 5 or probably 4 or 5 one attack minions at least to tutor with them. Otherwise, you're going to make your Christologies a lot worse if you just draw those minions first. So yeah, I mean, there's some interesting stuff here. Obviously, Stonehill just pretty good in Paladin. And then there's some of the other stuff pretty similar with the War Gears, the Ziliaxes, in this case with the Annoyer module, and even the Void Ripper here, which is pretty powerful. But yeah, I mean, I think that this deck is pretty interesting. The Wild Pyromancer and Equality synergy stuff is also kind of there just to provide a way to come back on the board, because this deck can sometimes struggle a little bit in the early game.
Yeah, it's I mean, this is the kind of deck I think is more likely, just like a more tempo-based deck, where like a little bit more stronger early game than the previous deck that you showed.
Yeah, I mean, this deck's really heavy on the meat wagon synergy. I mean, it's
all aboard the meat wagon.
Yeah, all aboard the meat wagon into Meccano Egg. I'm not convinced. I would. It's going to be interesting to at least try out as a meat wagon.
Void Ripper is going to be MVP though, I foresee, in this kind of deck, right?
Yeah, I mean, you are going to tend to get some high health minions, with your Spike Ridge Steeds and that as well. There's always the Linessa Sun Sorrow into like Void Ripper the next turn, kind of OTK nonsense in a way. I mean, the amount of health that she's going to have with the Spike Ridge Steeds on as well is pretty high, especially if you've managed to cast both.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and then there's also just the Dino Size as an extra.
The order is random, right? So like you could like
it could just be a 10-10.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They could like you do all this buff and then 10-10.
Sure.
Or it could be 10-10.
But it'll still be a 10-10 with Taunt and the Death Rattles from the Spike Ridge Steeds.
And Divine Shield.
You're not upset with that.
But I'm saying is the dream is if Dino Size first, and then you go like Spike Ridge, right? That's like
sure.
Yeah.
And you can get it up to 22. And Void Ripper that to smack them in the face for 22. But that's not really the point of Void Ripper in this deck. I mean, you could get up to 30 with a double blessing, but that's still not really the point. The Void Ripper is to help you kind of come back and maybe also synergize a little bit with the Wild Pyromancer. That can be kind of interesting as well. So yeah, I mean, that's Paladin. Overall, I think I'm not too excited by Paladin because of how poor a state the class is in right now. That's the big issue for me. I think Kangor's Endless Army is pretty decent, and I think if any class is going to make mechs work, it's probably going to be Paladin, because they naturally kind of want to kind of do those strategies. I just really hope that the deck works, because I kind of want to play something else other than Odd Paladin right now. I mean, that's the only real viable Paladin deck.
That's why I control Paladin.
I mean, you just kind of get bored of it, like, to a certain extent.
Going face.
The deck is fine. It's not that simple. The deck is not that linear. The deck
I know what you're saying.
Like, I want to be able to play a different kind of Paladin deck. Obviously, honestly, any other good Paladin deck existing will make Odd Paladin better too, because it makes the mulligans against the deck harder. Especially, if it's something like Control Paladin, where your mulligans are going to be very different.
Mid-range Paladin, yeah, boys.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, any of that's actually going to help Odd Paladin be even trickier to deal with on ladder. So, overall, Paladin, not great, but not too bad. Certainly not as bad as Mage.
Yeah, I think somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. If you have any feedback, drop it in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all those things. And you can also find us on Twitter. Handles are there. We will see you in the next video. Cheerio.